Hi, this is Robert Moynihan, and we're on an international broadcast with Dr. Habib Malik from Lebanon, live from Beirut this evening, and with my son, Christopher Hart Moynihan, in Kazakhstan. And he's the head of the Urbi et Orbi project in support of Lebanon called Friends of Lebanon. And he writes a regular monthly article called Lebanon Report. It is Tuesday, June 4th, and we are so privileged to have you with us, Dr. Malik, as the situation in Lebanon, the wonderful, beloved Lebanon, is very difficult now, and we want to talk to you firsthand about what we can do to help.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Moynihan and Chris. Nice to see you both again after some years.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it was 2022 in September, or late September.
Something like that, in Beirut.
So, yeah.
It was a wonderful evening.
Yes, it's been a while.
Yes.
So
let's go right to the situation of the conflict in Israel, and then the role of Hezbollah, a Islamic force. Oh, we have people watching us live right now, and I'd like everybody who's watching to know how much we appreciate you. You really give us a sense that what we're doing does reach people. We got someone watching from Brazil, someone watching from the Isle of Man, just off the coast of England, and we have other people watching. Lady Rotha, great to see you here with us. And if you have a question for Dr. Malik or for any of us, please post them and we'll try to answer them. The situation as you face it right now in Beirut, is it peaceful in Beirut?
Well, it's peaceful on the surface in Beirut, but there's a lot of rising anxiety about this war in the south that has been imposed on Lebanon by Hezbollah, spreading northwards and igniting a far larger conflagration, both in Lebanon and the region. I can tell you the majority of Lebanese are against this war. And Hezbollah took the decision to go to war unilaterally in the service of Iranian policy. The majority of Christians, the majority of Sunni Muslims, the majority of Druze, these are the main communities in the country, and a good portion of Shiites who cannot easily speak out their mind, many of whom have had their homes destroyed in the villages just on the border, are against this war. And no one consulted the Lebanese people, or no one went to parliament. Hezbollah just basically took the decision under orders from Tehran to plunge Lebanon into war. The situation is made worse by the fact that Lebanon since 2019 has been in general economic freefall and financial collapse due to a vicious mafia militia cartel. Now, the mafia, of course, is the corrupt ruling class, which defrauded the country over many years in collusion with some of the banks by siphoning off people's savings and money to the government, presumably to address the debt, but much of it was stolen. And the militia, of course, is the armed group, paramilitary group, Hezbollah, which serves Iran primarily and which protects the mafia, because the two of them have this symbiotic relationship at Lebanon's expense. So that's the backdrop to what happened on October 8th, the next day after the atrocious attacks in Israel, when Hezbollah just decided to enter the fray.
Okay. What could we do to help?
Well, first of all, knowing the truth, I think, is the most important first step. And the truth is that the entire region is totally shook up and imperiled by brazen Iranian imperial expansionism. Iran, in one form or another, controls 4 capitals in the region, Arab capitals: Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, and Sana'a, the capital of Yemen.
So
And they
Yemen, Lebanon, Syria,
Syria, and Iraq.
and Iraq.
Exactly. And all of the armed groups there are beholden to Iran and ideologically in the same camp as the leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, who has this kind of apocalyptic view that the entire region needs to be changed. Moderate Sunni countries that are friendly to the West need to be weakened, and Israel needs to be eliminated out of existence. So that and the most hypocritical part of all of this is that the Palestinian issue is being used as a convenient tool by the Iranian regime to pretty much spread terror, imperial domination by Iran, and to practice piracy on the high seas, as we've been seeing over the last several months in the Red Sea.
Well, that's a stark picture you're sketching for us. And I guess there's 2 directions we could take this. First, we could go personally back to your own experience as a person from Lebanon and your father's experience, and then come back to these political questions. And I think I'd like to take that path. Sometimes the political questions become very heavy and they depress us. So let's open it back to your childhood and to your father. And let's come back at this question at the end of the podcast once again. Your father was Charles Malik. This is a photograph from 1958. He was a Lebanese academic, diplomat, philosopher, and politician. And we're very privileged to have you with us as his son as well. He served as the Lebanese representative to the United Nations, the president of the Commission on Human Rights, and the United Nations General Assembly. He was a member of the Lebanese cabinet, the head of the Ministry of Culture and Higher Education, and of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, as well as being a theologian. He participated in the drafting of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. How do you remember your father?
Well, as a very loving father, we're a small family. I'm an only child, so I was very close to both my parents. I came late in the marriage, 12 years later, after 2 miscarriages by my mother. And of course, I was born after the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But despite the fact that my father was a very busy man and deeply involved in the issues of the day, and also, as you said, philosophically and theologically quite immersed in world affairs from that angle, he still found time to be a loving father. And I remember him around, and we would have wonderful summers together, either in the mountains in Lebanon or in places in the United States where he was stationed for a number of years, both in Washington as ambassador of Lebanon and in New York as the representative of Lebanon at the United Nations. So I had my early schooling in a Catholic school in Washington, Our Lady of Lourdes, first and second grades there. And I remember my father very well. He was writing a couple of books at the time. This was the very early 1960s. The book entitled Christ and Crisis, and another book entitled Man and the Struggle for Peace. And so, I was a kid running around, but he was there. And I kind of, during the rest of my life with him, I kind of acted as a fly on the wall whenever important people came to our house, and he had interesting sessions with them until the wee hours sometimes. Intellectuals, thinkers, not so much officials, because he would see those without me in the room, but more like intellectual discussions and cultural exchanges and so forth.
Yeah, so you grew up really more in Washington than in Lebanon.
Well, we were going back and forth. So after first and second grades, we relocated to Lebanon, and that's where I completed my elementary school, and then went to high school in Lebanon as well. Started off in history for my bachelor's at the American University of Beirut, and then the war broke out here, so I lost a year, and then I managed to go to Princeton for the year that I lost while graduating from the American University, and then I continued my graduate studies at Harvard for about 8 years.
And what was your main study there?
I focused on modern European intellectual history, and I worked specifically on the early reception of the thought of Søren Kierkegaard, who is, of course, the great Danish Christian existential philosopher. And when I say early reception, I mean the idea was to try to answer the question. We know Kierkegaard became world famous between the First and Second World Wars, but he died in 1855. So what happened to his legacy during those 70 odd years between his death and his becoming world famous? And the answer is about a 500-page book that I have since published, which I researched extensively.
Okay. Well, Christopher, do you know anything about Kierkegaard?
I know he's from Denmark, Catholic.
Not Catholic. No.
Not Catholic.
No. He was Protestant.
Protestant.
Yes, but he the last couple of years of his life, he had some falling out with the Danish Lutheran Church, the state church. And it's interesting that you mentioned Catholic, because a number of those who were influenced by him actually converted to Catholicism. And I have kind of mentioned this and spoken a bit about it in my book, but then later on I wrote a chapter in another book precisely investigating why it is that certain people who immersed themselves in Kierkegaard's thought headed for Rome. And I think I have the answer. And now we're really off topic, Robert, but let me just quickly wrap this up. The answer is because Kierkegaard, while attacking the Danish Lutheran Church, stopped short of attacking church authority as such. And it's not very difficult for people who are dissatisfied with, let's say, the general Protestant setting where church authority is very fuzzy, to kind of conclude that perhaps a second look at Catholicism, where ecclesiastical authority on matters of doctrine is fairly clear and fairly consistent, and that would eventually lead some of them to head in that direction.
Well, I'm not going to accept that I'm off the track here. Somehow Søren Kierkegaard is a Western figure who dealt with ultimate questions. Is there a meaning to man's life? Is there a morality that will destroy our souls if we go against it? Are we alone, or is anything meaningful? And this is a religious question. And
Yes.
these are and religious questions like this are at the center of Judaism. They're at the center of Islam. They're at the
Yes.
center of Christianity. And in a way, they're at the center of secular humanism as well. So Kierkegaard was seeking faith. Wasn't that the essential effort that he made, a personal faith? He wanted to stand by the abyss of nothingness and find something to believe in.
Very much so. And also, he was very clear on the limits of reason on its own. Now, he was not a fideist. Reason is very important, but he did point to something he called the leap of faith. And it requires a certain will and a certain courage to take that leap. And it's premised on understanding that reason is very important. I think he would have accepted the Catholic view of natural theology, that reason on its own can lead to some notion of a higher supreme being without the details. But one would have to then embrace a certain historical narrative. And to do that, one needs a leap of faith, not just reason.
We have Damien. Good evening, gentlemen, from Madrid. We have someone from Madrid, Spain. I studied Kierkegaard with Dr. Peter Vardy. Do you know him, Dr. Malik?
I don't know him, but I know of him superficially. So I'm very glad to hear there's a kindred spirit in Madrid on the issue of Kierkegaard.
We have someone else watching, Peter. Nani Darwish on YouTube grew up in Egypt, converted to Christianity, knows a thing or two about the motives of jihad, which is illegal infiltration into non-Islamic countries around the world. Well, thank you, Peter, for posting that. I think this question of religion and organization of life and somehow the plight of Lebanon today, which is the one country in the Middle East that's sort of multi-religious, I think these are central questions. And I think Kierkegaard and your study of him somehow gives you a privileged position to analyze this whole problem.
Well, that is true, but at the end of the day, existential immersion in the issues of the Middle East and of Lebanon makes all the difference. It's not just armchair or ivory tower study. And I think the first person to agree with that would be Kierkegaard himself, but also my late father. My father always emphasized an Aristotelian point as opposed to the abstract formalism of Plato. At the end of the day, freedom is not just an abstract idea. Freedom is free individuals. In other words, it is concretized in living free individuals. And Lebanon's story can be summarized really in one word or one phrase: the stubborn survival of freedom in a very otherwise bad neighborhood, which, where freedom is a scarce commodity and the region is very much freedom starved. Certainly when you see bad actors like Iran, which we just mentioned, and others before it in the region, you realize that freedom is not a very welcome commodity here. And that's why Lebanon's Christians, spearheaded by the Maronites over centuries, and at great cost to themselves in terms of blood and resources, managed to preserve a degree of freedom that set them apart from other native Christian communities that, for one reason or another, succumbed to second-class status under Islamic rule, or what Muslims call dhimmis, meaning the term actually means under the protection of Muslims. But to be a dhimmi means you have to be subjected to a whole series of conditions that limit your freedom. In other words, to merit being protected, you need to give up many of your freedoms. And Lebanese traditionally have tried to resist that. You know that Jews and Christians are classified as people of the book, according to the Quran. Yeah. And that sets them apart from, crass heathens or pagans. But they are nowhere to be considered as equal to other Muslims. So they have to live under the quote-unquote protection of Muslims and be subjected to a series of restrictions. And that's what the Lebanese Christians have tried, with a checkered history, I can say, to resist over the centuries.
Okay, so we are here in support of Lebanon. You're telling us Lebanon is in danger. You say the whole Middle East is in danger from an expansionist Iran. Someone just posted from Sao Paulo, Brazil, Gonçalo Soares, Saint Charbel, pray for us. And it
Yes.
just struck my mind, both Christopher and I were impressed by St. Charbel. So we're trying to bring in the factors here to complete this podcast. Can we say, who is St. Charbel?
He is an amazing monk, a Maronite monk from these mountains right here where I live. His place of residence as a monk is maybe a half-hour or 40-minute drive from where I'm speaking to you right now in Mount Lebanon. He was canonized as a saint because of a number of proven miracles that happened as a result of people coming in contact with him, or him praying for them, or directly touching them. And he is, without a doubt, Lebanon's greatest saint. He lived in the late 19th century, early 20th, and as I said, was known for being a very devout and holy person, a hermit, and he was sought after during his life by so many people. I was very uplifted when I went to St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan to see that at the very end on the left, towards the main altar, there is a shrine for St. Charbel, which is right there, and it's beautiful.
Okay. Can the spirit of faith and humility help Lebanon and the Middle East? And really, I want to ask about the Christian faith in the Muslim Middle East and the Jewish Israel. Lebanon has a strong Maronite community, but many of the Christian communities of the Middle East have been decimated, and partly, it seems to me, due to the American policy of invading in Iraq, where there used to be 1.5 million what is the community? The community. It's just, I just had a little.
No,
Chaldeans,
Chaldean,
the
Christian
Chaldeans and the
Chaldeans.
The
Assyrians.
Chaldeans. I had a
Assyrian.
little glitch. I'm
Yes,
getting
sir.
forgetful. The Chaldeans were 1.5 million strong, and I think there's 150,000 now.
Yeah. Well,
and Lebanon is even had its own drain, but not that great. And the Copts in Egypt are a Christian community in an Arabic country. But can the faith of Christianity survive these polemics, these battles, these divisions in the early 21st century?
well, I'm reminded of Christ's words: "Be as harmless as doves, but as wise as serpents." So I think wisdom is called for here, and that should include not only the way the Lebanese conduct themselves in the midst of turmoil and upheaval, but also the way I think Western and specifically American policymakers approach the Middle East. You mentioned the Iraq War. Yes, sometimes Christians and others are adversely affected by specific erroneous policies that come from the West. At other times, they are affected, perhaps that's more or less our situation, by sheer neglect, by simply looking the other way and not having the plight of Christians, say those in Lebanon, on anyone's radar screen. It's interesting when we talk about Christian communities in the region. They're all suffering, maybe with the exception of the Copts in Egypt, because they're quite numerous. The other native Christian communities are all suffering from demographic hemorrhaging, from attrition, from emigration outside the Middle East, from low birth rates, from things like what happened in Iraq, things like what happened during the Lebanon war between 1975 and 1990, and since when Hezbollah came to the ascendancy. All of these have been affecting the native Christian communities here and causing them to dwindle. What is remarkable is that the Christian community in Israel is actually thriving. And they're the only Christian community that is increasing demographically in numbers. And I think that's a noteworthy, that is a noteworthy and important observation to be made and to be acknowledged. Clearly, Christians in Israel are, for the most part, better treated than Christians in other parts of the Near and Middle East.
Okay.
Dr. Malik, I wanted to just chime in here because I wanted to get a perspective about the events that are happening right now, particularly the Gaza conflict between Israel and Hamas, but also I wanted to see, because you were talking about kind of your father's role in the United Nations and in kind of the formation of Lebanon as a country following, I guess would be 1923 or 1919. I'm not exactly sure.
1920 was the formation of Greater Lebanon, but 1943 is when Lebanon got its independence from France. So my father was active in politics after 1945.
Okay, so could you just, I guess to really specify my question, there's obviously you just mentioned the Christians in Israel. There's also other conflicts in and outside of Lebanon with kind of as a result of groups of refugees coming into Lebanon from other places. First was the Palestinians beginning in 1948 and then kind of culminating the first time in 1975, I guess, with this conflict that leading to civil war between various factions, which is, if you could clarify that a little bit, and then also talk a little bit about the Syrian refugees coming into Lebanon and those two waves and how that has affected the history of Lebanon in the last 75 years.
Yes, those two instances, if you will, of refugees coming into Lebanon have been very problematic for a country that is very delicately balanced in terms of sectarian composition. Before 1975, the Christians were about 51 or 52% of the country, so they were a slight majority. And since then, this has been eroding. And most of the incoming refugees, whether Palestinians after 48 or whether Syrians, really after 2011, when the war in Syria broke out, and they've been coming in huge numbers ever since. The vast majority of those are Muslims, and to be specific, Sunni Muslims. And that, now, of course, they are not naturalized citizens of Lebanon, so they don't vote. But they are, in a very small territory, an increasing burden, if you like, on the resources and the strained economy of a place like Lebanon. And the problem is that very often in the Middle East, the transitory tends to become the permanent. And we can't afford that in Lebanon, given our very delicate demographic composition. And so we've been calling, we understand why the Europeans don't want any more immigrants from this region into Europe. Although I have to say, they set themselves up over the past few decades with this very bizarre notion of multiculturalism, which they fabricated and they actually believed. If people from all parts of the world come into Europe, and they see us living the way we're living, and they see us going to the malls and just going about they'll become exactly like us. Somehow magically they'll become like us. This is the lie of multiculturalism, and the Europeans set themselves up for this. And now when refugees, specifically Syrian refugees, have been trying to take to the sea to go to Europe from a place like Lebanon, suddenly the Europeans woke up and said, no, 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 we can't have that. They have to stay in Lebanon. Well, why should they stay in Lebanon? Why not? And I have to say there is aid coming in from the EU, from the UN, from other agencies to help the refugees, whether Palestinian or Syrian. But why doesn't this aid go to the Syrians who should be repatriated to Syria? Syria is a large country compared to Lebanon. 18 Lebanons can fit inside Syria. And not every corner of Syria has a war going on. Most of Syria is pretty peaceful at this point. So many of these refugees can easily be repatriated to Syria or have shelters for them set up inside Syria on the border in Lebanon. If some of the men would like to come to Lebanon to work, that's always been a feature between Lebanon and Syria. We have no problem with that, but they don't need to bring in all their families and start having children here in an unregulated fashion. Many of them don't even qualify to be given the designation refugee or political asylum, because they've left Syria under duress, let's say, and then all of a sudden on Islamic feasts, they go back and celebrate in their villages, and then they come to Lebanon, and they continue to claim that they qualify for refugee status. It doesn't work that way, because international law simply precludes that. So Lebanon has a lot of problems with Syrian refugees. Lebanon has been strained to the maximum in terms of the little it has to be able to offer them for schooling, housing, basic needs, and so on. The Lebanese population, as I tried to say, is itself impoverished severely after the collapse in 2019 due to this mafia militia cartel that I mentioned. And instead of the Europeans and other international agencies thinking that, the Lebanese also deserve some help in their own country, all the aid is coming to the refugees, and no attempt is being made to repatriate them to safe areas inside Syria, a much larger country than Lebanon. Frankly, I don't understand it.
Can we go back to this? Yes, that image with Iran. We see Iran in red, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And as you said, Dr. Malik, this is Iran with control over 4 Arab capitals. So Baghdad in Iraq, Damascus, Syria, and then
Yemen,
also
which is not visible
Yemen,
on the map. It's in the southern Arabian Peninsula, right? And
then also Beirut, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So we have the problem with the Syrian conflict and the refugees who are basically, a strain for the country. You could put it that way. And then also, if we could go to the next image, we have, as you just said, the Hezbollah ruling party, which is extremely closely tied to to Iran. And Iran is a massive country with massive influence. It's you said Syria is 10 times Lebanon. What did
18.
You say? 18 times. And then Iran is like 5 times Syria if you look at Iran.
Or more than that. Several Syrias can fit inside Iran.
So this is Iran, a massive country, and it's controlling Hezbollah, which controls Lebanon. And if we can see the Hezbollah,
Yeah, so those yellow areas are the area where Hezbollah has considerable control. The south part of Beirut, the whole southern part of the country near Israel, and the part near Syria.
In the northern Bekaa Valley, yes.
Can you just two questions. First, can you just talk a little bit about what happens in a regular day if you, as a Lebanese or anybody visiting Lebanon, were to travel from this white area into this yellow area? What's the feeling? What's the difference as you go into Hezbollah territory? And then broader question, can Lebanon and Hezbollah ever find a way to coexist? It's a much more difficult question, but yeah, that would be my...
Let me quickly address the second question. Hezbollah has been doing everything in its power to undermine Lebanon as a state and as a society. And that is in keeping, we have to know this as a fact, what they're doing is in keeping with Iranian radical Shiite ideology. So that's what we're dealing with here. Now, on your first question, that yellow area just south of Beirut is the southern suburbs where Hezbollah have their headquarters. Today, it would be very difficult for anybody to try to go there. They have their own people who have cordoned off, armed people, elements, who have cordoned off pretty much that area because they're very worried about intruders, infiltrators, spies, and so on that could come in and help Israel in its effort at the war. Now, in terms of the South, yes, it's very difficult to go to the deep South on the border. It's almost impossible today because that's a war zone. In fact, the residents there have fled northwards, and there are Christian villages there, and they're pretty empty at this point. But other parts of the South, I mean, my wife is from a Christian village just east of Sidon, and we went there not long ago. We went there last summer, and we've been there some weeks ago for a few days. We were there actually for Palm Sunday, and it was very quiet, and one can go there. But, you know, if this war begins to migrate northwards, then all bets are off in terms of where one can actually go. I haven't been to the northern Bekaa in many, many years. I mean, I remember I went to the Baalbek festival even before 1975, before the war. And I saw a great French flute player, world famous, named Jean-Pierre Rampal over there. But that was the last time I've been to the northern Bekaa. That would be 1974, 1 year before the outbreak of the civil war here, or the Palestinian-Lebanese war, however you want to call it. So I think that kind of answers your question right now. And remember, one last point, Hezbollah are very well entrenched and dug in these areas. They have tunnels with the help of North Korean tunnel excavators, and they've been arming for many, many years, since the last war they had with Israel, which is 2006. So it's a problem. How will Hezbollah and Lebanon be able to coexist? If there is a Lebanon, it would be very difficult to coexist with Hezbollah the way they are right now.
Well, when you say if there is a Lebanon, you come to the heart of our podcast. We are concerned that Lebanon could break up and come to an end.
In many respects, Lebanon, official Lebanon, has become a fiction, Dr. Moynihan. And the question is there any chance of resuscitating it? Not in the way that would preserve pluralism, freedoms, healthy sectarian interaction, and so on, which is what we have seen throughout Lebanon's history during the good times. That is all anathema to Hezbollah and anathema to Iranian ideology. So if a future Lebanon is going to survive and remain cohesive, it would have to most likely follow what other composite and divided societies have adopted as the best political formula, and that would be some version of creative federalism. The only way for Lebanon to remain a unified state is for Lebanon to become a federal unified state, where there is considerable local autonomy for the various sects throughout the country. This is doable. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. Constitutional federalism can happen. Of course, today it is near impossible because Hezbollah will refuse it. Hezbollah do two things today to the Lebanese. Anyone who disagrees with them is immediately labeled a Zionist agent, when in fact they themselves openly declare that they are totally beholden to the ideology of the ruling regime in Iran. So if there is any foreign agent in Lebanon today, or an agent beholden to a foreign power, it's Hezbollah. And yet all the other Lebanese who disagree with them are immediately castigated as traitors and Zionist agents. That's one thing. The other thing is Hezbollah openly rejects the notion of federalism. But in fact, they themselves have gone beyond federalism. They've created their own independent enclave in these yellow areas, their own independent enclave, all complete with their own economy, their own infusion of money, their own drug dealing, their own arms and weapons acquisitions, and what we've seen lately since October, their ability to declare war and, openly declare war and then end wars. So, yeah, there's a big question about the future of Lebanon as we have known it, if this is going to continue.
Well, this is very sad, and many things are sad. We love Lebanon, and we love the Maronite community, the Catholic community in Lebanon. We look there and we see Sidon and Tyre. I wanted to tell our viewers, there's a number of times in Scripture where Sidon and Tyre are mentioned, and it says in the Gospels that Jesus went to Sidon and Tyre. He must have walked, or maybe went on some type of donkey, but he must have walked all the way up from the Sea of Galilee, which is that blue sea next to the word Israel. That's the Sea of Galilee. That's where Jesus spent most of his time. And then he would go down to Jerusalem. But he also went into southern Lebanon, which is why Christopher and I always say Lebanon is part of the Holy Land, the land where Jesus walked.
Very much so.
Yeah. Now, if we look at this map, the larger map, we will see that Lebanon is the green, Israel is the blue, the white part inside Israel is the West Bank, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then Jordan. Iran is this large country, which everyone should always remember. Iran is not Arabic. Iran is Persian.
Yes.
So it's a different culture. They don't use Arabic language. They speak Farsi. Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia are all Arabic countries. And these two countries somehow have very close Western relations. Lebanon was a French colony. Israel is the Jewish state. And they have that area along the Mediterranean Sea there, which includes these famous ports, Beirut, Tripoli, Sidon, Tyre, all that's beach of Mediterranean. And then someone was asking, are there any resources? This person called Christian Unity, are there natural resources, oil, gas, minerals, and others in Lebanon?
Well, recently, if you will, I could give a quick answer. Recently, there have been some discoveries of oil and gas off the Lebanese coast. And there was a bit of a dispute between Lebanon and Israel on control of some of those oil fields, maritime oil fields, along the border between the maritime border between Lebanon and Israel. And that kind of came to a resolution, a peaceful resolution, not long ago. And the Israelis, as a result of that, got the Karish field, which you may have heard of, which is already producing gas in commercial quantities. Lebanon has some deposits. The French company Total is excavating and looking into that. But because of the situation in Lebanon, because of the economic collapse, because of the control of Hezbollah and others, because of this war now imposed on all of us in the region, any kind of movement towards the actual location, if not the beginning of extraction of Lebanese oil and gas resources, is on hold at this point, like everything else in Lebanon.
Yeah, so you're speaking there off of Sidon and Tyre and down off of the coast of Israel.
Yes.
Some, as you see the words written out there, Mediterranean Sea. I don't think it's that far out, but it may be. There are gas deposits in various places, and they try to mark them from the border. That yellow part where it says Sidon and Tyre, that's the border between Lebanon and Israel. And they draw a line out into the ocean, and they say on the top side of the line it goes to Lebanon, and under that line it goes to Israel. But they've drawn it in a kind of with two different slants.
That's right.
They've been debating who gets.
That was the nature of the dispute. How do you draw the line? Do you take a line perpendicular to the point at the exact point in Nakura, or Rosh Hanikra, as it's called in Hebrew? Do you take a line perpendicular to that, or do you just extend the line that already exists in the land in the land border? Since the land border has still not been demarcated officially, then Lebanon could not do that. And so they kind of had to take a perpendicular one, which was to the advantage of Israel. In any case, if you look at the map in the upper left-hand corner, you see a bit of Cyprus there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And so that little white spot.
Exactly. Cyprus, the neighboring island, has its own economic zone in the Mediterranean, and Lebanon and Israel have their own economic zones. So I don't know how far out to the word Mediterranean Sea the zones would extend, but you'd have to take into account that there are 3 countries there, actually 4 if you look at Syria at the top, just north of Lebanon. There are 4 countries that have economic zones there, and how all of this is going to be sorted out is going to be interesting. Israel and Cyprus have come a long way in working things out between them, but Lebanon and Syria are still very far behind.
Well, what the people in Lebanon told us when we were visiting, and Chris will remember, that in 5 years, if they can sort these things out, and if they're careful environmentally and they don't have oil spills, they can drill in the Mediterranean and they will find oil like they do over in Dubai and Bahrain, and they will have more oil off the coast of Lebanon and some also off the coast of Israel than they can imagine, and they will become rich. And the country could have a wonderful future in terms of human prosperity, but they will always have this question, how to organize the country for mutual respect of these religious groups.
Right.
And therefore, the next 5 years in Lebanon may be of enormous importance in determining whether Lebanon can stay together and be a sign in the world of how people can live together, Christians and Muslims.
Exactly. I think short of actual incontrovertible data from excavation and so on to find out exactly what reserves exist, everything else is speculation and very often wishful thinking and exaggeration. So we really don't know how much of these resources exist there. But you're right, whatever resources exist can go towards rehabilitating the country, provided you don't have the mafia militia cartel overseeing that process, because they will just simply steal it, like they've done with everything else in Lebanon. So again, back to Chris's question, are Hezbollah's ascendancy and Lebanon compatible? I don't see that. They're not. And Hezbollah is doing everything possible to erase Lebanon as we've known it, certainly its freedoms and certainly its posture in the region and the world. If for somehow by some miracle this challenge, this pressure of domination by Iran is lifted, Lebanon can have a very interesting and potentially good future. The Lebanese would then have to know how to get their act together and put their country back together with all of its different confessions, religious.
I don't want to take, again, I'll let Christopher speak, but when you say the Lebanon can have a good future, and when you say the this whole thing is in doubt whether they can work this out, it really breaks my heart, because Lebanon as a diaspora community worldwide, often a wealthy community, that ought to be able to find a way to come together and with other governments, whether they be in Paris or in Washington, develop a support plan so that young people in Lebanon wouldn't think we've got to get out of the country, we've got to go to Paris, or we got to go to America to get a job, and stabilize Lebanon and keep it for all time as the beautiful Lebanon of the tall cedars and Mount Lebanon, which is that dark line in between the two yellow Hezbollah parts, the tall cedars of Lebanon. But I'm going to complain a bit about the diaspora community of Lebanese. I don't think they're doing enough.
Well, if I may, Robert, you have a point, absolutely. But remember, for the diaspora community, which tends to be very wealthy, and not only that, they genuinely love their country of origin, their ancestral country, Lebanon. They visit it as often as they can. They do send money to their families and so on. Lebanon lives in their heart. The reason they haven't been doing enough lately is because they don't have confidence and trust in the mechanisms that if they would send money, that the money would actually be used for the reasons they are sending it. And it's these mechanisms in trustworthy hands that we need to think of creating. The diaspora, the Lebanese diaspora, has been burnt severely in 2019 because a lot of them lost a lot of money in Lebanon as well. And in order for them to restore their confidence, we need to find an avenue, a mechanism, a fund perhaps, that would be overseen by a few very highly respected and ethically impeccable individuals with high profiles. And that fund should then be directed towards, as you said, allowing the Lebanese to endure this terrible ordeal. And the way to do that is to help them fund the education of their children and offer them healthcare, affordable healthcare. So the two sectors in Lebanon that the free Christians were principally the agents of creating since the 19th century are healthcare. We have a first-rate healthcare system still in Lebanon today, and education. And for many years, I was a professor of history at the Lebanese American University here, and I'm retired now. But I know that our schools and our universities, certainly the private ones, are unsurpassed in the region. And, other places in the region, Lebanese academics and doctors are highly sought after by, the Gulf and other places. And they would love to be repatriated to a peaceful Lebanon. So a fund that would instill confidence in big donors among the diaspora who love Lebanon, such a fund directed towards helping suffering Lebanese families educate their children and afford healthcare would certainly stem the tide of emigration, would plug a hole that is hemorrhaging the country demographically of Christians.
Well, I wanted Christopher to tell a little bit about our Friends of Lebanon project, which you are directing, and you're writing the Lebanon Report. Tell about some of the kids that you've met, some of their stories, and starting already back with the explosion in the port.
Yeah. So yes, we began this project in 2020, the second half of 2020, After that explosion on August 4th, it was a horrible thing to witness and see the effects of. And we started, getting these reports in from different people that we knew and had known for many years, working, in Italy and Rome. A lot of connections through the Maronite monks there in Rome, at the monastery that they have there. And then just throughout 2020 and 2021, we were basically thinking, how can we help out, because there's so, we also felt like this huge, loss of this potential that exists that you were talking about, Dr. Malik, which is such a shame to see, like, a country with these, with this enormous potential in terms of, as you said, like healthcare, education, spiritually rich, and all of these and this rich history, just kind of go into this period of complete collapse economically, and then also after this, explosion, which is a whole other debate that we could also get into, of course. But so yes, we have been sending monthly support to a group that is very trustworthy, personally verified by us and by our friends, the Friends of Lebanon organization, and we've supported several hundred students as they continue to go to school. And it was actually mostly students that had been impacted by the explosion, and these stories were incredible. I mean, there were kids that, they worked a job at night and their father had lost, his job, or their mother had died or something. There's so many stories like this following this horrible explosion. And these kids are incredible because they're mostly middle and high school, and they're doing basically superhuman things so that they can continue, to stay in school and get their degree and get their, finish their education. And we've been supporting them, and we want to, continue to do that as much as we can, and turn it into something that can, as you said, like, lead to a brighter future, not just so that they get their education and leave, but so they finish their education and feel like they can kind of rebuild the country in a positive direction. So yeah, so that was the main thrust of what we were doing, education. And then we also have been supporting local families that were affected by the explosion and helping them with, food. Some we supported with money so that they could buy furniture and things that replace things that had been destroyed in the explosion. And so we're continuing to do that as well. But this
is amazing work, Chris,
Yeah.
and we are deeply thankful. I'm sure I speak on behalf of so many Lebanese who have benefited or who know of your work. Just for your viewers and listeners, let me just clarify that the explosion Chris is talking about is a massive explosion that took place at the Beirut port on August 4, 2020, as a result of igniting huge quantities of ammonium nitrate, which is a form of fertilizer that can also be used to make explosives. And that ammonium nitrate was stored in the port by none other than Hezbollah. And so, in a sense, during one of the attacks by Israel on a Hezbollah weapons depot at the port, somehow that huge amount of ammonium nitrate was ignited, and it caused a terrible explosion. I mean, short of a nuclear explosion, it's, I think, classified as one of the biggest in history.
I think it was third or fourth all time. Yeah.
As you know, 1/3 of Beirut was destroyed, which is mostly the areas overlooking the port, and they happen to be Christian areas. So again, you are extremely to be thanked for the amazing work you've been doing on behalf of the beleaguered families there.
All right. Well, if we look at this map, we see little Lebanon. Syria is a much bigger country. It seemed in some years past Syria wanted to take over Lebanon, just didn't digest it. And we know that top yellow area in Lebanon has 1 to 2 million Syrians living there who were fleeing from Syria in the civil war they had. You're saying now that they go back over the border when they want. It's a huge problem. It's not clear how it will be settled. What is the future relationship between Lebanon and Syria?
Well, as you said, Syria under the Ba'ath regime of Hafiz Assad and his son now, Bashar, have had designs on Lebanon. And Lebanon has suffered since its independence in 1943, a number of attempts by outsiders to take control of the country. First, it was Gamal Abdel Nasser, the great Arab Egyptian leader in the late 1950s. That was thwarted. Then it was the PLO, Yasser Arafat and his crowd. They relocated from Jordan in 1970. And in 1969, an agreement was imposed on Lebanon by a number of other Arab states to allow for armed Palestinian activity against Israel from Lebanese soil. And that all of that set the stage for what happened in 1975, which was a flagrant Palestinian armed attempt to take over Lebanon. After 15 years of war, that too was thwarted. So then we had Hezbollah and the Iranian period, which we're in right now. And that, again, is another attempt to seize control of Lebanon. So you're absolutely right. Outsiders with malevolent designs and with a visceral hatred of freedom have wanted to obliterate Lebanon and subsume it under some form of their control. And just as we dodged the Nasser and the Arafat attempts, I am on some deep level confident that we will dodge the Iranian attempt as well.
All right. So
And,
I think, yeah.
And to add to that, with the conflict in Israel and Israel at Gaza, what do you think Lebanon's relationship should be with Israel? Ideally, what would the relationship be? Because now it's a relationship of Hezbollah kind of dragging the country into war with Israel. But
we should make clear that yellow area at the bottom of Lebanon, around Sidon down to Tyre, and especially as you get closer and closer to Israel, that's the area where there are Hezbollah forces. They're not under control of the Lebanese government in Beirut. They're more connected with Iran. There's thousands who have tunnels, and they have missile firing, artillery, and Israel is starting to bomb them inside of Lebanon. So that's where the war could become between Lebanon and Israel and really be terrifying.
Yeah, well, look, before we ask the question, what are Lebanon's relations with Israel? Let's look at the entire Sunni Arab world. They have been consistently moving in the past years, even decades, towards some form of normalization with Israel. And if anything, the rise and domination of Iran has, in some ways, accelerated this Sunni Arab move towards greater normalization. There's talk right now, even in the news on television, of the Americans trying to broker some kind of Saudi Arabian-Israeli rapprochement. And some people say that the entire October 7 event was instigated by Iran and its allies simply because they were seeing the Sunni Arab states coming closer and closer to normalizing with Israel. So the question then becomes, why should Lebanon be an exception if this is going to be the future of the region? Some form of normalization, some form of acceptance of the other, some form of peace and prosperity in the region. Why should Lebanon be an exception to this? As a matter of fact, as I started my talk today, the majority of Lebanese, regardless of their religious affiliation, are against this imposed war by Hezbollah on their country, and they would like nothing better than to have normal relations with all their neighbors. Syria, which Dr. Moynihan asked about, Jordan, Egypt, and certainly Israel. Why not? But this is not possible today, and it would be called anathema, and people even mentioning it would be branded as traitors and so on, when in fact everybody knows that Iran is very cynically using the Palestinian issue for its own ends and not for the sake of the Palestinians.
And just to clarify, though, would you say, like, when people, you say there's the majority of people that that are against this, and then there's others that are branding them as, Zionists, or basically against, they're kind of foreign agents. But what are the percentages of these different? I mean, Hezbollah is controlling, or they're representing what percent of the population versus the percent that really wants to be neutral and supporting peace?
Well, as I said, the Shiite community is not all completely with Hezbollah, meaning some who are unable to speak out are against this sort of behavior by Hezbollah, this kind of dragging Lebanon into a war. And that's within the Shiite community. But I can assure you the majority of Christians, the majority of Sunnis, even though the Sunnis in many respects are deeply sympathetic with the suffering people of Gaza, and they see what's going on nightly on their televisions and so on, even though that's the case, when it comes to a Hezbollah diktat in Lebanon, a takeover in Lebanon, they're against this. The majority of them are. So are the Druze. So right there, in the four major categories in Lebanon, a majority exists that is against what Hezbollah is doing. And when you mentioned those who brand others as agents and traitors and Zionists and so on, that's only Hezbollah doing the branding, nobody else.
Well, Christopher and I traveled in Lebanon all the way to the south. We went in a car with a driver, and we went to a little place called Kana, which is near the Israeli border, which is a second choice for the city of Cana, where Jesus performed his first miracle. There's a dispute that one is in Galilee and the other is in southern Lebanon. The cities of Tyre and Sidon, Jesus walked. The Maronite community produced great saints, St. Rafka, St. Charbel, St. Maroun, in the Kadisha Valley. Kadisha means holy, holy valley. Lebanon is a place where the Christian community went through great suffering over the centuries, and it remained faithful. It's a vibrant community still today. There's a large diaspora Lebanese community, but the country is in danger. The diaspora community should come together. It should offer support so the young people think they have a future. Otherwise, they'll be fleeing the country, and Lebanon could be in danger of being divided and maybe even disappearing as a country. You having a discussion in September in Washington, some type of a seminar, talking about many of these questions. Before we leave, could you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, in September, we have in the Philos project something called the Charles Malik Institute. And we're putting together on September 4 in Washington a conference that is broadly titled Arab Critiques of the West. And fundamentally, it pits against one another, if you will, two very different types of critique. The one by the late Edward Said, which I can designate as a blanket nihilistic rejection of the West and vilification of everything Western. That's one critique. And we've seen that very much play out on college campuses, unfortunately, recently, where we have seen this emergence of this alliance between the global left and the global jihad. I mean, it's very odd. Queers for Palestine. It's almost like saying chickens for KFC. If they only knew what would happen to them if they were in Gaza, they wouldn't last 5 minutes. Anyway, so there is that, which is one of the legacies of Edward Said. And then there is the Charles Malik critique of the West, which simply boils down to this. Westerners, and especially Western leaders, need to remain faithful to the deepest in their Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian, Western heritage. They need to remain at all times faithful to the deepest in that heritage. It is that heritage, Robert and Christopher, that is today under assault across the academies and universities of the West. Palestine is simply an occasion for the left and the jihad to get together because they hate the West. They hate the Judeo-Christian heritage. They hate it. And they are using any excuse, including right now Palestine, but they'll have other excuses to use in the future in order to bring about this undermining of the Western heritage. So that would be the interesting themes that will be covered in our September 4 conference in Washington.
Dr. Malik, this has been a wonderful presentation of various aspects of the predicament facing Lebanon. You are an important professor. You're speaking out about the danger Lebanon is facing, following in the footsteps of your father, who was a leading figure at the founding of the United Nations, a figure always in favor of peace. And Christopher, I wonder if you can summarize what we've done and what we're going to try to do in this present terrible crisis.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Malik. I think, I couldn't really have put it any better than what you said. I think what we have to do is come together and just continue our work in the same vein as what we've been doing in projects like Friends of Lebanon. Friends of Lebanon will continue, and we will keep supporting as much as we can, but we obviously need to have more unity, more support, and more just awareness of what's happening, because it's still not on many people's radar. Even with all of the current events that are happening, people still struggle to even identify what's happening in Lebanon or the history, why it's important, even though, as we know, it's extremely significant and important. So for me, yes, I think that this is a great discussion. I'm inspired to continue, because I think this is just the way forward, is just to draw on that heritage, as you said, to kind of keep supporting this freedom that is so rare. So that heritage that we have and that we're lucky to have, it's also something that we can draw on and also draw on the spirituality of Lebanon, hopefully, to Saint Charbel, and continue to give support as much as we can, and continue to help this community thrive, hopefully into the future. So that's my hope.
Well, thank you very, very much, Robert and Christopher, both father and son, for your amazing love for Lebanon and your efforts to bring Lebanon's plight into the public arena and into people's minds and so on. We just had a blackout here. Now the motor electricity is back. So this is Lebanon. We live like
Oh.
this.
So
Yeah.
we just saw your predicament. You had a few seconds there of darkness.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, we've seen it. Yeah.
Hopefully it'll stay on this level, but there's no guarantee. Things could get very bad
Yeah.
very quickly. So we pray. We are strong believers, and we support all the efforts in the West to rehabilitate the great Judeo-Christian heritage over there, and to combat terrible things like what we're seeing, the anti-Semitism and other things we're seeing on campuses in the West. I don't recognize my old alma mater, Harvard, since October 7, frankly. It was never like this. In any case.
Well, thank you, Doctor. And I hope we can talk again. Do you think we can speak again in the future?
I'm at your disposal anytime. Just let me know.
All right. Then to all of our listeners, we appreciate you. If you enjoy, please like, please share, and please let's pray together for Lebanon. The country will stay together, and the people will carry forward their beautiful heritage.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.